hyper children, creative storytelling, and a wealth of surrealism. Welcome to Mark and Pete, two blokes with half an opinion. Today we're sipping from the strong brew of modern childhood. Fizzy nerves, fairy tales and fine art. Whether it's the sacred rhythms of bedtime stories or the surreal surprises of grace, we're asking, what kind of world are we raising our children into? And what kind of imagination do they need to live in it? Here's our first thought for today.
Hyperhead hangover. Hyper Harry consumed copious amounts of coffee cups, such as latte espresso and American plain, which boosted his body with lots of pick-me-ups, but sadly percolated his overbrewed brain. Well, indeed, there's a growing trend that's going on. Yes, in the United States and indeed in many other parts of the world, teenagers are using caffeine pouches to get that energy rush. Now, this is a worrying trend. They are like little small tea bag-like pouches. Yes, tea, but no, this time filled with caffeine. And what this does is it delivers a quick caffeine hit straight to the bloodstream. Mr. Pete, I wonder, do you think that this perhaps is hyped up a little bit too much? Or really, is there now a major concern over the intake of caffeine?
There is a major concern because, caffeine needs to be taken only in small doses. There is such a thing as too high a dose, and you could even get to too high a dose with coffee if you manage to guzzle down 4 strong coffees in one suck. Maybe you could get to what you get, 400 milligrams of caffeine in one go from one of these caffeine pouches. It's that serious. So yes, if you imagine, gentle listener, drinking 4 lots of coffee straight down, you'd get a bit of a buzz from it, and the concentration of caffeine is going to cause dizzying effects. What you're ending up doing is giving yourself such a boost that you're fidgeting, your mental health could well be affected because you're just, too hyperactive. And you also likely, particularly if you're taking it later in the day, you're going to lose sleep over it.
Well, that's exactly the problem, because many doctors and experts are saying that this intake, this rapid intake of caffeine, can certainly boost your ability to perform, whether you're doing exercises or whether you need to just basically go about your business to concentrate. But the problem is this, as you quite rightly say, it actually has the side effects because it gets not only just into the bloodstream, it affects the brain. That's one of the key things that is a concern here. Whilst a lot of teenagers, they actually have gone on to many social media channels and sort of said even just 2 pouches gives them a hyper buzz. But there is also lots of other people would say that it can have effects on your whole blood system, your heart as well. So the fact that it pumps your heart even quicker, if for any reason you do have maybe a sensitive heart and you didn't even know it, this could actually be very, very dangerous. Now, of course, the other thing as well is, as you mentioned, it's about affecting your diet. So a healthy diet, you need enough iron, protein, and slow releasing carbohydrates. That would typically be the sort of thing that you need, a balanced diet. So whenever you have a boost of anything, it's a problem. Now, these little packs, technically in themselves, I guess, probably wouldn't be illegal. But the fact is that when you start to take them in such high dosage, we can't really ban caffeine, can we? But maybe we should start to sort of think about, how retailers and many others should think about who they sell them to. Because, again, this is one of the things that should it come with a warning. Now, here, Mr. Pete, I want to ask you, caffeine is seen in many things. We've already mentioned coffee, but, of course, it does appear in many other things. Now, there's some very well-known brands. We won't mention the brands, But of course, they do appear in things like energy drinks.
Yes.
And of course, there has been some concerns of a very well known one, which gives you wings,
Yes.
where if you have too much of that, each of the drinks often contain 80 milligrams in a 250 ml can, soft drinks and many others. But also, here's the other thing. If you pick the right type of chocolate bar, there is around 25 milligrams of caffeine in a 50-gram bar of
Mm.
dark chocolate. And so I know that you like your little bits of chocolate
Oh,
and you like
yes. Big
munching
fan.
on things.
Yes.
Big fan. So isn't it as a parent, where would you have concerns? I mean, obviously overindulging on chocolate, you'd just be sick. But from a parent's point of view, what should they do in terms of making sure that children don't take caffeine pouches?
Well. Look, here's the thing where people perhaps misunderstand the dynamic in parenting. Say, oh, look what my children are getting up to, forgetting that as the parent, they're in charge and you need to enforce your will on certain things. And yeah, taking caffeine patches, which are so high in caffeine, more than the amounts you mentioned that are high in things like very strong chocolates. And so you should as a parent be start off from making it clear that you're in charge of, for example, diet, and then you can make restrictions as necessary. If you're not in that
Yeah.
position, then it's very difficult. And I do think you're making parents' lives easier by, for example, you could, for example, make it difficult to buy these caffeine pouches, and maybe they need to be prescribed. I don't know if they're very high dose, maybe they need to be prescribed. But there are ways to handle this because we do it in other areas. Certainly when you have drugs produced, there's an actual um, dosage that's recommended. Maybe that could be brought into this
Oh,
as
yes.
well. I mean, we're not talking about a prescribed drug at the moment, so if we're not talking about that it's only prescribed. I mean, then does it? But that doesn't really mean that you can't extend regulation. You can change regulation however you want it. And we're not big fans of regulation here, but when something's necessary, perhaps to make parents' lives easier, um, they could have the size of the caffeine amount in each pouch reduced. I don't know whether that can be done, but the main thing to do is, as parents, take control of your children's diet.
Well, here's the thing. Now, here's some guidance. So a lot of doctors will say that it always depends on the individual. So bear that in mind. So it's quite clear that, some people are more sensitive to caffeine than others because they can either feel nauseous, anxious, irritable, and they can get headaches. And that's just after listening to the Mark and Pete show.
Yeah,
However,
inevitable.
what is mentioned is that generally up to 400 milligrams of caffeine a day appears to be mostly safe for adults. Now, that equates to approximately 4 standard cups of instant coffee. Tea contains a little bit less, but maybe you could go up to 5 cups a day. Now, what they're often saying is it depends again on your condition. If you're a pregnant woman, they basically advise to halve the daily intake to no more than 200 milligrams. But teenagers are much more susceptible. So this
Yeah,
is the point here, which is where the education comes in, because they are potentially at risk for an overdose. And
yeah,
once you get overdose, that's where it affects your mind and your body. So I agree. I think it's more around education.
yeah.
I think it's very difficult to regulate these pouches. But yeah, you just need to be cautious, folks. Well, look, I mean, we've got loads of things now that we want to sort of move on to. Now, here's a slightly more creative story: the spirit of storytelling. A creative children's story can be darker or lighter, but the best is a haunting tale told from a good reciter. And as each little child's face gets much whiter, end by telling them that you're the ghost writer.
Ooh.
Yes. Well, I'm sure many parents around the world have tried to sort of scare their children, but what makes a good creative story? Now, when we come to storytelling, we're going to put a little bit of a spotlight onto somebody who we've known and loved for a long, long time. For any parents, they have been teaching their children how to read. Many would have probably have had a book written by Alan Alberg. Unfortunately, he died recently at the age of 87, and he was really a main publisher with Penguin Random House. Now, some of the main books that he's written over the years, he's written, in fact, over 150 books, but there's some of the famous ones are The Jolly Postman, Funny Bones, Peepo, and of course the award-winning Each Peach Pear Plum. Now, Mr. Pete, creating a good story is always entertaining for anyone, but for little tiny minds, you want to be entertained. But it's not always about the fluffy, etc. Surely a good horror story is a good thing to get your children
Yes.
engaged. What say you?
Mr. Mark, yes, part of an early part of my career, I was, I was tasked with the job of telling stories to young children, and also had children of my own, and it's amazing how much a really horrific story where everyone dies or at least suffers grandly, goes down very well. Of course, it depends how you tell it. Going into too much actual technical detail of a gruesome death isn't the way to do it, but you can have people dying gruesomely in an amusing way, and it goes down very well. They do want to have a little bit of shocking detail, but it does depend, as we were saying in the previous section, on the individual. Now, I have several children, as you know. I'm doing my bit for the population. Now,
Yes,
there's
yes,
two
you
of
are.
them these days they're young enough that they go with me to the cinema. Maybe older children will think, well, I don't want to go with dad. No, but these two children are quite opposite in their response to movies. One of them is uh, really scared of what's often called mild threat, and the other could easily watch a horror story and think, well, it's only a movie, what's there to be scared about? So it does depend on the child, but in general, yes, a little bit of thrill titillates the story. But the main thing is, of course, a good story, likable main character. I think they've got to like someone in the story, otherwise they're not going to follow it. And something that grabs their imagination, a bit of wonder, but something unusual, something strange. And crucially, one other thing, which you don't have to have in every story, but can grab them, which is a silly joke.
Yes.
So I
That
think
always
those are
helps, doesn't it?
the main. I mean, and say someone like Roald Dahl, for example, was famous for able to do all of those. Alan Alberg very good at creating the world in which there was this sense of wonder that I was just talking about,
Yes.
and partly because well, it's sort of that nice old world where fairy tales lived, where yes, there is the horror, but it's contained. There is the humour, but there is this nice world and characters who you root for. There's also a sense of rhythm and rhyme in his stories, which helps carry the story along and keep the interest, especially if you're reading it out.
Correct. And I think that's important, isn't it? Because the head of children's literature at Penguin Random House said that Alan's books were brilliant, basically. So many of them created with his wife, whose wife actually was the illustrator, and that helped to sort of bring a lot of this to life. Because I'm sure that many people will know you're quite right. You have a good reciter, you have a good storyteller, and that's one side. But if you have a good pictures, it also keeps the
Yeah,
child
yeah,
engaged,
true.
especially when they're learning. Because if you're trying to sort of learn not just pictorially, but they're also trying to learn from a literary point of view. And what they often said is that Alan's books were very much around true
Mm.
classics, and they were loved by not just the
Yes,
families, but
yeah.
the children themselves. So you do need the buy-in from the parents, and I think that your point there is it's very important that
Well,
it's not just about the child; it's about the teacher and the parents who
yes,
are
true.
educating them.
And I would also add that you could be intentional here, and I believe he was. You have stories about the moral world that you want them to inhabit.
Yes,
You can from the Bible, Philippians 4 verse 8 is the reference. It says this is a good way to develop a good mind. Whatever is true, whatever is honourable, whatever is just, whatever is pure. Think about these things. You can choose not to have your stories be about things which are going to drag the child down. Where evil can be defeated, there can be horror, but good can come through horrific circumstances. You can make sure that the stories are good stories which acknowledge that there's evil in the world, but give that sense of hope and trust that you want in children and want them to develop. When they're young, they need to be able to trust their parents and those who are in loco parentis. And as they go on in life, they need to be able to trust God. So you can decide to put that into stories, or you can decide to abandon that and just go for content which either pushes your own particular political point of view, which sadly has been true recently, or you can just go through whatever you think is going to make you stand out, whether or not it's bad. One thinks of a recent publishing phenomenon which majored on witchcraft.
Well, I mean, that's really important when we think about storytelling. But let's move on to a different type of storytelling, which might seem a little bit surreal. It's all a dream. Folk who can't resist the art of a surrealist probably need a psychologist. So if you are a realist, here comes the twist. The whole world does not exist. Yes, indeed. Well, surrealism, a big art movement in the early part of the 20th century. Now, Salvador Dali was very much a Spanish surrealist and very much admired throughout the entire art world. Well, what's incredible at this recent times is that somebody bought a particular obscure-looking painting for £150, only to then discover that actually this was a real Salvador Dali painting. Well, Mr. Pete, I tell you that what's incredible is that this now piece of artwork, real or not, as you may see, is actually worth over £30,000. Now, I ask you, what do you think of surrealism? And more importantly, it's really the art of serendipity rather than surrealism, isn't it?
It does feel rather surreal, doesn't it, to be buying a painting for 150 quid and it's worth, what is that, 200 times the amount? Listeners will tell me whether I got the calculation correct. But yeah, it does seem very surreal. What is my opinion of surrealist art? Well, I think listeners will know that I think it's a load of nonsense, but that's not doesn't mean that other people aren't prepared to pay for it. Yeah, I'm not an appreciator of surrealist art. In fact, I think Dali should have stuck to the nice drawings and paintings he used to do when he was younger, and I personally wouldn't have paid for any of them, but would still have enjoyed them more. And as you know, I'm old enough to have been a friend of his. So, yeah, that's my opinion of it. But this this doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the craftsmanship and indeed what the marketing of someone like Dali, and I think that's often not appreciated. He once said, "The difference between me and a madman is that I am not mad," which is just brilliant and possibly true. He was great at marketing his own work, of course. Moustache included, and I think so if you wish to pay for that, then that's great. But just think of the strange providence, I guess, of finding a painting that you pay only that amount for, 150 quid, and it's suddenly worth a lot of money, and it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What things have you got lying around that are actually very, very valuable?
Yes.
That you might just be throwing away or selling them off cheap in a garage sale. We've got to think about. I mean, just before we continue, I just have to say there is, of course, as we like to do, Christian connections here. There is a connection to the Christian idea of the kingdom of God, like being the pearl without price that's been found that was hidden, and it's Matthew 13 verse 44. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, is the idea of finding a treasure that is hidden, and you suddenly find it. But it's beyond that. It's just interesting, and I think exciting to think, oh, there might be something of great value around me if only I could work out what it is.
That's quite. Well, what's interesting about the Dali piece in itself, for those who have had a chance to look at it, I'm going to say is probably not typically one of his iconic pieces.
Right.
Now, what's interesting is, and I can sort of understand why many people overlook this, because it's a rather obscure image. It's typically a watercolor paint, ironically, felt tip as an illustration of a scene from the Arabian Nights, a series of 500 pieces which Dali intended to create of Middle Eastern folk tales. And it was commissioned by wealthy Italian couple Giuseppe and Mara Albaretto. Now, the thing here is that when you do look at it, I'm going to say it looks to me as though somebody's accidentally spilt some paint and trodden on it. Now, maybe that's just my interpretation. So in many ways, you could say, well, that's surreal in itself. I will say that Salvador Dali was a great exponent. I think that his dream scenes that he often portrayed, the lobster telephone, very amusing. And you're right, he was a performance artist. He also did video, embraced the different types of mediums, but he was somebody who was a showman. And I think that that's something we need to take into account here. But coming back to the actual piece itself, is it really worth £30,000 or more? Well, we will see whether our listeners think so. But I will say that it's really about your interpretation of the world, isn't it? Because what we're talking about surrealism is that really it's the way you see the world. What one person sees as the world may not necessarily be the same as others. And so, Mr. Pete, I say that, art to you maybe isn't as important. Art to me has been throughout my career. But I will say that I think that Salvador Dali, maybe not so much in this particular finding, but I think overall is a very distinctive artist that just gets you thinking. Even if you don't like the actual look of the image, it does actually provoke you to think, that's saying something to you, particularly those dream sequences.
Just to agree with you here, because having dissed the whole surrealist movement, there is that painting. I think I'm right in saying there's several versions of it, but it's the picture of Christ on the cross over a bay showing a fishing boat.
Yes.
I think it's the Christ of St. John of the Cross.
Yes.
Now, and that has been very effective in preaching sermons. In the past, you could put up that image and say, it's Christ looking down on the world. In this case, on this particular fishing village. So, he had a good imagination. I just, in general, I don't appreciate it, but even to my weakened artistic sense, some of his pieces were able to break through.
Well, I will say that at least the one thing that we all recognise is that he had a very distinctive handlebar moustache, pointed, almost sort of horn-like, and he had that sort of strange glaring look, and so his presence was all part and parcel of his art. But I will say that definitely the next time that you happen to come across any kind of weird-looking image, check it before you actually decide to sell it or throw it away.
Yes, and in closing, that's all for Mark and myself for this week, but let's leave you with this thought. Watch the caffeine, cherish the storytellers, and remember, even the surreal can be sacred. Goodbye. Catch you next time.